Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Deep Fix. In this very special episode, I'm joined by my friend, the ever-visionary Rosa Lewis.
I think in a lot of people's understanding of the world, that kind of logical, oh, this needs to happen, then this needs to happen, then this needs to happen, really holds people back and stops people feeling what's present for them or processing deep things, expressing what's really true for them, because they're sort of locked into all of these habits and ways of looking.
Rosa is a mystic and teacher. Her approach combines Buddhist emptiness traditions, shadow work, tantric embodiment, the archetypical realm, mysticism, and a radically new way of relating to heartfulness.
I've described it as secure attachment to the universe. It feels related to the okayness, everything feeling okay thing you were describing. I guess it's another way of describing soul safety, but it's sort of like a deep connection with life itself in a way where there's enough security to be open, honest, present.
Her work helps people realize and connect to their true nature and to open to the true nature of the universe, which is what we're doing in this conversation, which is really an exploration. It's designed to be experiential, which is the best way, I think, to experience Rosa, her unique expression and teaching.
Yeah, there's something in what we were just describing. There's something in the combination of the two, which is where the magic happens. Relating to yourself as this alchemical vessel, being willing to open to the meaning and the depth, but also not taking the meaning too literally.
What we're doing is exploring in what she calls shared imaginal practice, which is like a dynamic meditation. And so if you are watching or listening to this at home, definitely encourage you to come into a bit more of a meditative state of receptivity and go on this journey with us, which will hopefully be not only mind-bending, but heart-opening. Without further ado, I give you the wonderful Rosa Lewis. Rosa, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Today, I'm excited to do something that is a little different for the podcast, and that's to explore a topic with you in a meditative way. And this is something that I've actually learned from you, which is almost a shared imaginal practice, a way of going deeper into a topic or the present moment experience. And something you and I have been jamming on and has captivated us is this idea, which I originally read somewhere on your website, which is that the universe is psychedelic. And I would love just to start by hearing a little bit about where that came from.
Yeah, sure. So I think there's a way that it'd be cool to explore more with you what do we mean, what could we mean by the fact that the universe is a psychedelic? Because I think that psychedelic can mean lots of different things to lots of different people. So for some people, it's just like super hedonistic or like seeing lots of visuals or something like that. But yeah, what I'm meaning, and I imagine what you're resonating with, but I would love to hear more about from your perspective, is things where it's more like there's a kind of surface level happening, which is the sort of normal Western scientific perspective that's going on. But then underneath that, there's this more sort of like resonant, associative, heartfelt, soulful, like deeply sacred, meaningful, surprising bit underneath, energetic, kind of, yeah, underneath or like behind, or not really sure which direction it is, but in the mix, there's this much more kind of, like resonant way of being that most people experience, I think, when they take psychedelics, but can also be accessed through meditation, imaginal practices, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the what some people might first think when they hear something like the universe is psychedelic, they think that you actually need a psychedelic to experience that, when for me, first hearing that, what that really points to is just the nature of experience is far stranger and more magical and alive than we typically give it credit for. And I think that psychedelics at their best, that's what they show us. I think the thing that also just I can't help but think about is how whenever I have taken psychedelics and I look at my phone or have come across a computer, I always have this visceral reaction of just like, oh, get this thing away from me. Like this makes me want to almost puke. Where and there's something really telling about that, and I don't know what it is, but there seems to be something that is like it just drops you into this that layer, whatever direction it in is in of experience that seems to be just so much more captivating than perhaps life on the screen.
Yeah, when you say that, it feels like the sort of like insides and the energetics and the emotional mood and the feeling of something becomes as loud or as important as anything that's sort of out in the world. And maybe, oh, that was nice actually. I remember when we were discussing this podcast, just to recommend to people while you're listening to this, it might be nice to like go for a walk or lie down somewhere comfortable and just kind of like let yourself get in that mode where it's more resonant and open and flowy. Because the conversation is probably going to have a bit of that cadence rather than, um, yeah, very like logical way of talking or thinking.
Yeah, thank you for that, Rosa. We're definitely exploring here, and that's one of the things that in getting to know you, I've so appreciated is that we can kind of just feel, reflect, hear what each other is sharing, and see what that elicits. And yeah, what you first mentioned about that substrate that exists underneath the surface of sort of the default Western modern living, it reminds me of another one of what I feel psychedelics' best qualities are is that it almost forces you to, they almost force you to be in the moment, to be just in your experience, because the alternative is getting sucked down this super intense rabbit hole into thought and just discursive thinking and thinking and thinking. And of course, that's kind of what we're doing all the time in everyday life, or many of us are, prior to maybe having some sort of contemplative practice. And so it almost feels like the teaching there is to pay attention to that direct experience. And then when you take that into your sober day-to-day life, the more you do that, the more strange it gets, the sort of the more closer you look.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And it also brings up something important about this, which is that, yeah, it's about being in the truth of the moment and being with what you find and being open to what you find there being more sort of psychedelic than you'd imagine, rather than having some sort of specific idea of, yeah, it like needing to be special or trippy in a specific way that you're kind of like, yeah, it's not a sort of grasping towards a different state. I think, yeah, like you were describing there, it's about being in the moment and just being present, being kind of in your body, open hearted. And then as that happens, as you sort of sink into your heart in the present moment, it's like, oh, revealing that things do have this more kind of psychedelic nature in them and allowing that to just sink in and be present. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and your everyday experience, I imagine, is further on the spectrum towards strange and magical and synchronistic than most people, I'd imagine, right?
Totally. Yeah. It's like for me, it's like my whole world is super psychedelic. But I think one of the things is that now feels normal. To me, I'm kind of like moving in a world that feels very, um, yeah, I guess it's like a flow state of just being with experience. And that it doesn't feel particularly kind of like special. It just feels like, oh, this is what experience is. And it's very normal and peaceful and calm. Um, But then as I start to describe it, it's like, oh yeah, this is psychedelic compared to normal. Or,
Yeah, and it's hard to describe too.
Mhm.
I've heard you talk about how you can almost like with time, sometimes it can feel like a second is like an eternity. And so it sounds like that's one of the ways in which your experience is probably quite different than most people, like really being able to zoom in the present and have that like immediately kind of slip into timelessness. But yeah, when people hear that your experience is quite psychedelic, I'm wondering like, yeah, how might they understand that? What would that mean? What are other ways other than maybe time that you feel it's really striking for you?
yeah, I think time sort of feels in a way like one of the core parts where yeah, I guess a very technical way to describe it is like the default mode network, or the more kind of left hemisphere way of being in the world is very sort of linear time. This happens, then this happens, and this happens. And it keeps people in habitual habits, ways of looking, ways of feeling. And with some meditation practice, you can start to just sort of like open that up a bit more, be more open. And then as time and space sort of drops away a little bit and you can kind of, yeah, just be in the present moment or just feel things, it's like the energetics of the present moment, the body can start speaking. So if people have had experiences of like jhanas or subtle body, that's a big component of my experience. Um, and then there's also kind of a almost like a different logic that can come in when time and space sort of unravels a little bit, which is rather than, and this is where I think there's some really nice kind of like everyday magic that can happen as well. Really deep sort of like um yeah, transformation, but that also just has that feeling of sort of like at home in it rather than like big wild uh transformation. It's more like people coming home to themselves. But there's a sense of, I think in a lot of people's understanding of the world, that that kind of logical, oh, this needs to happen, then this needs to happen, then this needs to happen, really holds people back and stops people like feeling what's present for them or processing deep things, or even like, yeah, being present with their deepest desires or expressing what's really true for them, because they're sort of locked into all of these kind of like habits and ways of looking. And when time and space isn't there, it's more like it's more like an energy sort of bubbles up and you're like, oh, what's in this thing? And it's like, oh, there's some sadness, or oh, some joy, or um, yeah, like beauty or some frustration. And rather than attaching like a story or a very specific kind of idea of that's there because of this thing, and I need to, in order for that to change, I need this thing to happen. It's like you can come into relationship in a way, yeah, that has this sort of imaginal, energetic quality of just exploration of like, oh, sadness. I wonder like what's in there, and you can kind of feel it and look at it and look at the shape of it, and sadness can change into an ocean, that can change into joy, that can change into connection to the divine, that can change into like deep anger, that can and it can just sort of like have this unfolding of sort of almost like a magical story that's unfolding, rather than yeah, a kind of um yeah, just being stuck in the normal way of being.
Right. And when I think about psychedelics, for anyone who's done a strong psychedelic, you get those waves and visuals and emotions turn into maybe fiery flames, just like you're describing. And it all kind of moves and flows quite fast, right? Where you, on the one hand, can be ecstatic joy, and then the next be like, oh no, like it's all falling apart. And this in the that doesn't just happen in psychedelic experience. I mean, I know this and I'm getting reminded of this all the time because we just had a baby and my baby just started smiling, and which is just utterly heart melting. But what he'll look like when he smiles is like he'll be smiling, but then he'll be like, and get that like contorted like anger sad face, and and I've been with a lot of people in their deep psychedelic journeys through my work and whatnot, and it looks very similar to what a person's facial expression looks like on a heroic dose of penis envy mushrooms, right? Where they're just like, yes, breakthrough. Oh no, I'm in hell. It changes that fast. And so, yeah, I think again, like a thread that we're pulling on here is like, even though the psychedelics are such a good tool to help understand this inherent nature of experience, but it's really not required to feel that. And yeah, what you talk about too, just like the more identifying with clouds of sensations or the body of energy being more loose and porous, like without boundaries, it can make life a lot, I don't want to say easier, but richer. And this reminds me of another one of the facets of your work that I think I've probably got the most inspiration, which is your the way you approach soulfulness and soul. And it feels very appropriate to this conversation of the universe being psychedelic. And I think the line that you wrote, which is it's feeling life as deeply as like a musician who's in the art of their craft, feeling their music. And I think that's when you hear you describe just going into this bubble of energy or emotion, like that's what I think of. It's like it's less of categorizing things into good or bad and more just like, oh, how can I just feel this as deeply as possible? Like if I'm sad today or tired, I mean, my these days I'm a happy guy, but the big thing is tiredness. That's the big thing. It's like, how can I just be super tired and put on tired music and lean into that in a way that isn't freaking out that I'm tired?
Yeah, yeah, nice. Yeah, totally. Yeah, to me, soulfulness, the psychedelicness, time, meaning, resonance, it's all the same kind of part of experience. And it's very related to flow and like, yeah, being able to really be with the full spectrum of life, to like feel things deeply. And I think one of the things that sort of came through when you were talking then that is important is something that I call soul safety, which is a sense of, I guess it's like a deep trust in the story, the sort of collective intelligence, the story that the universe is telling on some level, which feels a bit kind of similar to like set and setting or something when you're taking psychedelics, of just a place where you can kind of almost like give yourself up to the psychedelic so that you're not fundamentally fighting it anymore. It's almost like there's something that happens there with life where you can just sort of like, um, yeah, something deep inside you is just like, I'm in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing, feeling the right feelings, whatever that feeling is that's coming up, even if it's hard or challenging in some way. I'm sort of giving myself to it, allowing, yeah, surrendering and trusting that there's something deeply meaningful in it. There's some lesson, there's some thing that I'm integrating, there's some process that's happening that, yeah, has some sort of meaning in it.
That soul safety is, I agree, is so important, but also so much easier said than done,
Mhm.
right? Like that's what can't help but think of there is that I had done so much psychedelic work and trained, and I thought that I knew about surrender, but then I would say that it wasn't only until I went, for whatever reason, my path took me back deep into intensive meditation, where I realized and got to learn just practicing letting go, like moment to moment, just like subtly, 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 not even in the midst of a psychedelic tidal wave coming, it's like when you see a big wave when you're surfing, you're like, "Oh no, that one, I'm gonna get totally held down." Um, that wave can come on really strong in psychedelics, but yeah, I guess what I'm saying is like it was so hard for me to learn to surrender or to really like trust the universe and to do that, to be able to start to like open up and moments throughout the day on and off the mat. And so I wonder, like, how might someone, yeah, how can you cultivate that trust in the universe?
Yeah. Two big things come to mind. One is heart states. In a way, everything. Is this true? There's a way that I could say that everything's about the heart. It feels like, in a way, one of the most important things, where it's just like, if the heart is in it, it kind of can't go wrong. Um, and yeah, sort of doing metta practice or gratitude or forgiveness or joy, anything that sort of like gets the heart flowing in a nice way, I think really helps. Really helps with that. Um, and I think the other one, it's still kind of about the heart states, but it's, for me, the deep trust opened up when someone held the space for me to go into a part of a deep shadow, a part of myself that I was like, some way in which before I was separating the world into like good and bad very clearly, or want this, don't, this is okay, this is not okay, something, about myself. And then in a process was held through, a much more kind of like whole, expansive, deep way of being that also had a sort of like a bit of a kind of archetypal shamanic, it was Jungian shadow work, so included that kind of archetypal layer. And it was like suddenly after that, it felt like someone holding me in a space where they were like, I really trust your experience of you. That's what clicked it into place for me, where I was like, oh, I can trust my experience of me. And there's something in that, like being held by others, that's also, I think, important. I think a lot of the work can be done, meditating on your own, doing your own journey, those things, but also some of it really has to be done in connection and being on the receiving end of that kind of, like love and acceptance, I guess.
Yeah, they're talking about how that relational component to this is pretty inescapable.
Would it be cool to do a bit of journeying now? See what comes up?
Yeah, I'd love that. That's a good prompt too, as we talk about the importance of relationship in all this.
Yeah. Do we have is there a different theme that's come through, or does the theme just the world as a psychedelic feel good still?
I like that one.
Yeah.
I think
Cool.
this one still feels pretty alive for me.
Nice. Okay. Let's see. So we normally journey eyes closed. Should we do that, or should we have our eyes open and sort of stay?
Let's try let's mix it up a little bit. Let's start
Yeah.
eyes closed to drop in, and then maybe we can open things up and especially come back into relationship. Yeah, in that
Sounds
way.
great. Cool. Okay. I'll start, and then if you want to ask anything, jump in.
Yeah.
So, we'll start by doing a couple of slow breaths. And if you're listening as well, it might be nice just to take a nice slow breath into the belly so the belly expands, and then breathing out through the nose. And this just gives the body the signal that it's safe, it can relax. And then we can open it up. So the world is a psychedelic. Would you like to say it out loud as well?
The world is a psychedelic.
What do you feel in your body as we drop into this?
I was feeling, and I am feeling, well, one of the things that was interesting was that I think I had originally read it as the universe. And so when we switched it to the world just now, and I don't know if that was a switch or my interpretation, or whatever, I noticed like an energy. There was something that felt even closer and more contained, almost like these energetic webs, like sinking into me from sort of around a bubble around me. So this idea of that spherical world, like I was feeling the energy.
Nice. Yeah, I love that. I love the that how one word can change. It's like a word can contain an entire universe or an entire world, and just by changing a word, it can impact. It can like create a different mood or a different vibe. Um, yeah. So the world is a psychedelic, and what do you feel in your heart space?
Hmm. I feel a subtle tingling, and again, there's a visual. I tend to be a pretty visually oriented, high visionary person, and there are now those webs still reaching out from what seems to be like a large sphere around me, but they're now like red and pulsing with this reddish yellow, almost fiery flame light and energy in it. There is something really relieving about that connection. And with that relief, there's also a little bit of emotion, just like a little bit of sadness, all the times I forget that, right? It's like I feel it's so easy when you and I drop in like this, Rosa, to remember, but I feel some sadness too for just all the times I don't remember that. And I'm in a more isolated mindset.
Yeah, beautiful. And if you bring in that version of you that's in a more that feels a bit disconnected, in a more isolated mindset, is that yeah anything you want to see or recognize or say to that version of you from this place that feels connected?
Hmm. Does feel like it felt like as you said that he was sort of just or something smaller, some essence of that part was just absorbed into like the webs at my sort of lower chest, sternum region. So there was something already just relieving and just being acknowledged and just articulating that and just being really honest with that fact. And I think that's the potency of this sort of world is psychedelic, that almost koan or pointing instruction. It reminds me of that, like, oh, that connected tissue, it's there.
Yeah, it's super nice. Um, I'm curious about the sphere that's around you. I wonder if there's more you'd like to say about that, or if it, yeah, what it means to you, or what it symbolizes, or anything like that.
It's a good question. I'm checking. If, what I'm really getting is just that it's pretty trippy. It's pretty psychedelic, It just is. There's like it's changing and morphing, and at times it looks a bit like what you would looking at a river tributary from zoomed up from far up in space. And it looks a bit like that, where there's all these nodes and tendrils and kind of fractals just weaving down and around. And so, yeah, there's a little bit of this zoomed out quality. Uh, yeah, and I'm curious too to hear what's going on in your world over there as you hear me mention these things.
Yeah, I feel like I'm mostly in a very just big, vast, empty space. I, I'm still resonating with the the difference that you mentioned between the universe is a psychedelic and the world is a psychedelic. Where, yeah, I did just do that by accident, but it's almost like as soon as you said the world is a psychedelic, it was like this new kind of mood or feel opened up where it was like, rather than the universe, which is very like the universe kind of is space time, it is a bit more structural. The world, it has this feeling of, yeah, different worlds, like your world, my world, the world, building worlds, fantasy worlds. It has this like way more sort of fluid psychedelic feel to it. And just the amount of, it was like, it's almost like as soon as you said it, all of that meaning was kind of in your, in the energy of your voice and your being. Uh, and then sort of, yeah, feeling that unfold as you describe more and more details. It's just very cool and interesting. And um,
Yeah, I'm getting the
yeah,
chills now as you are talking, like, and the PT sort of is flowing. And I also, as you were just speaking, I'm like my sphere just absorbed into the vast spaciousness. And but then that idea you were touching on of these multiple worlds, like that also feels like there. And so as you were sharing, what's interesting is that the sort of movement and activity of that one world that I was in, it settled and sort of absorbed, and now it's like a bigger space with more worlds, but there is a little bit more, I'd say, of peace too.
yeah, as you describe that, I get a feeling of, from the most zoomed out perspective, it's like the, it's like from the most zoomed out and the most zoomed in perspective, it's like everything becomes just little energy. It's like energy bubbles where each little sensation or atom or super galaxy or whatever scale it is, it's like whatever the thing is, it's just a little boop, like a little meaning energy bubble, boop, a little world that kind of comes into being and then does its thing in the mix with all these other worlds. Um, yeah, and there's a, like when you're in those worlds, there's so much activity and intensity. But if you can pop out to that perspective, it's like super calm and peaceful, and there's a deep acceptance of how things are. It feels really nice.
Yeah, it does feel nice. I just felt a similar wave of relaxation, and It's interesting too to notice how there's this sense of space and worlds and vast space. And what I was just feeling into as you were talking was a little bit of like, well, and then we happen to be like these sentient beings somewhere in this, or rather, we're just that world or universe looking at itself. But there is that just that curiosity towards like, what's going on with that, you know?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, and a little laughter too, which is, yeah, there's something even just even in at least after as you were speaking and how what I've been feeling just now, like a wave of sort of a very psychedelic wave of like no remembering the sense of separation, separate self, having that then absorb into the bigger, vaster space, and then coming back into that more flowy realm, which is just, yeah, I'm just really struck by how, you don't need any psychoactive compounds to be journeying in that
Yeah.
way.
Um, is there anything else you'd like to explore here, or should we open our eyes and see what happens?
Yeah, let's open. Hmm. Well, I'm noticing the room is really bright and has this almost like crystalline blue hue to it. Noticing that you feel closer to me too, even though we're doing this from video conference from a couple, at least one continent away.
Yeah, when you described the crystalline blue, I was like the sense of kind of like the mood of being by the sea on a sunny day, or like in by a nice swimming pool or something where the light's reflecting off the water. It was almost like getting the feeling of that, and that feeling like I'm a metaphor for the way of seeing reflecting off of this deeper, or including this deeper sort of emotional level, more kind of watery, flowy soul level.
As you say that, I'm reminded of this very psychedelic idea, which is like this, the more quiet or stiller I get, it's almost like just two mirrors being held up in front of each other, where it's just this holographic reflection and you can't really put your finger on anything and not one thing is looking at another thing. There's just this space in the mirrors. And when you mention that water and that ocean, yeah, I'm feeling that, especially juxtaposed to what I get a little bit more of these like foresty vibes looking at you from the ivy plant behind you.
Right. I think one of the things that going into the journeying realm opens up for people is more attunement to their soul senses. So I guess that you could call that just intuitions. It's almost like the way you can feel someone else's, energy or like their system more. Um, and I think it's important that it's open hearted. So it comes from that place that you would describe, the sort of like, whoa, what even is this kind of mystery level, rather than sort of like some fixed ideas about knowing what is in other people's experience or things like that. But there's a sense of like, more openness to receiving other people's vibes and really connecting with them and being present with them.
Totally. Yeah, and it's that openness of just being what I feel is a lot more willing to help or to
Mm.
listen. It's like something one of my teachers told me. It's just like if you're open, then you're not contracted, and someone just says, "Hey, pass me that water." You're just like, "Sure, here you go." You don't think about it, you just do it, right?
Mhm.
And I think that like I coming out of that space, and even though we're still in it, like I noticed that same sort of quality of just like, "Oh yeah, of course."
Yeah, nice. I wonder what other changes to your way of being it affords as well. Because I feel like there's a way that this stuff could be, if disconnected from what it means to be in this way of being, could be a bit just people sitting around like having nice experiences disconnected from reality, which is also a fun and enjoyable thing to do. Definitely
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that. But I think that we both feel that there's something very important and deep in this. And I wonder
Yeah.
what it
It's a
affords.
it's a good question, and I mean, it also, like, I think it could feel strange for people who don't meditate or do psychedelics to even have this type of interaction, but I think for me, what I would wanna stress or articulate is just, like, yeah, the connection that I feel with you, even though we're doing this, like, through technology. We've met in person, but so we have that basis, but there's there's just I had work that I did today, and got a baby, as I mentioned. There's stuff going on in my life, and just right now, after just doing that brief exploration, I feel more of that tangible trust in life itself, in the universe, and more of that relief. And I think it's a little bit of that, and it's hard to. I think most people can probably relate to this. It's very hard to get at it, but it's that just belief that it's all going to be okay. That's what
Mm,
I'm feeling now. That
mm.
it is all okay, and that we can get kind of weird with it and soulful and like zoom into experience. And it almost I think the thing that I've because it was new to me before we started doing it, Rosa. But I think what it started unlocking for me was like that these experiences are happening, and as I mentioned, I tend to be a little bit more visually oriented or visionary, especially with the eyes closed and whatnot. And like I can just pay attention to that and talk about it. And then that if I tell you about it or I tell someone, that kind of does interesting things.
Mm. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's like the imaginal is always present at some depth, whether people are aware of it or not, at intuitive level. And by being aware that it's there and being able to bring it in, it's like a whole layer of information that can be helpful or interesting or rich or connective or inspiring or has all these possibilities in it.
Right. And that's something that because you do this quite a bit. And how do you, yeah, I'm curious if I were to flip that question back at you, like, what does it afford for you? What does it afford the people that you guided through? And I imagine too that these are a lot of people who, they've done traditional therapy and they've done a lot of the so-called work, right? But then this is something that's quite different.
Yeah. For me, the biggest thing that comes up is the sense of nourishment. it's just a sense of almost being most at home in this place, the soulful realm. And yeah, if I can't go there every day, there's something in me that just sort of slowly starts to die a bit. It's almost like if I didn't eat all day or something.
Mhm. Yeah, the nourishment, that's such a good word. And I'm like reminded of another thing why I feel like this is cool is like, I think people, for better or worse, when they think of meditation, they think of following the breath or a chore or something that's really difficult. But like you can actually just kind of like let it rip and be super creative, and everything's fair game that comes up. And it's almost like, a different way to describe it is sort of just like free association, just sharing what is ever in your experience. And I think it can be that imaginal practice, which is really I mean, I think the simplest way to describe it is just, yeah, allowing your imagination, or I'm sure you have a better, I should let you define it. But I think for folks who aren't familiar with it, it's like it's actually kind of way easier than, it's not what you think, right? It's not a chore. And you do get that nourishment to just like, oh, what's going on here?
Yeah, yeah. It's there's a huge amount. Once people have found it, it creates a huge amount of just freedom and freedom of expression and being. And yeah, yeah, it's great. I love it for that. Um, yeah. And so then I think in terms of people I guide, one theme that comes up a lot is I've described it as secure attachment to the universe. It feels related to the okayness, everything feeling okay thing you were describing. Also feels related to nourishment. It's like, I guess it's another way of describing soul safety, but it's sort of like a deep connection with life itself in a way where there's enough security to be open, honest, present. Things don't need to be perfect. There can be, rupture and repair like there is in a secure attachment to a normal relationship. Um, you can sort of accommodate the imperfections of life. You can, um, have long stretches where it's hard, have long stretches where it's absolutely beautiful. And that connection can kind of, yeah, withstand the challenges and overall is like healthy, happy, strong, trustworthy, meaningful, rich, all of those things. And yeah, there's something interesting, which is I think that there is some kind of academic research on this about emotional energy and where we get a sense that, yeah, kind of like an emotional energy or a sense of sort of self-worth in life from. And a lot of it, that is relational and what's valued and our connections, the people around us. But there's also a version of it that is more mystical, that comes from a kind of deep faith or some kind of spiritual connection. And having that connection can, get people to do things that maybe like society or their immediate relationships wouldn't reward, but to them feels like deeply meaningful, important. Um, yeah, and that research, it's Erica Summers Erica Summers Effler who does that, which is really cool. But yeah, if anyone wants to look it up.
Yeah, it's almost that secure. I love that it's concept of secure attachment with the universe. This sort of practice and this sort of approach also reminds me of so when I was early in my psychedelic path, I had a few really hard, intense, big experiences, in particular with ayahuasca, where I needed a lot of support. And, I had come through with my history. I had came through with a lot of trauma to heal and whatnot. And so I had these really big, big experiences that sent me into places of, almost psychosis, or was psychosis. And what one of my uh, friends and facilitators would always say is, sometimes you got to get a little lost in your own neighborhood and get to know your way back around a little bit better. And I really like that idea of just like getting lost in your mind and being okay with that. And Yeah, and because I think it's really easy to approach meditation, personal development, awakening, whatever you might want to call it, from this idea of like, oh, like the thoughts shouldn't be so intense. I should be with a more spacious, clear mind. I should be able to bring myself back to the breath or my object more quickly, whatever it might be in the kind of earlier stages of the journey. Like with this approach, you just can entirely let all that go and see what the universe is creating for you, which is usually pretty weird and trippy and fun and beautiful and a mix of all of the things.
Yeah, totally. I love that. It reminds me of there's a line in one of my poems, um, an adventure of suffering, which was kind of talking about my journey. And it's like this feeling the difference between the feeling of going on an adventure of suffering versus just trying to achieve some meditative state and suffering because you're not getting there. And well, it's like a different world that you're in, I guess.
That brings to mind another one of the favorite things that I read from your I think it was the awakening framework around soulfulness, which is just really like embracing the character that we all have, right? That like in the more that we can embrace that we are this unique, there's only one Rosa, there's only one Alex, and yet we're connected. We're part of that, soul doesn't, I think and I appreciate your distinction around like soul doesn't, the soul is connected to everyone else, but there's this singularly unique expression. And the more that you can actually lean into like being that character, like you're a character in the movie and really embrace, like what would it be like to live like if you were, a character in your own movie and like you're acknowledging that, you're as the actor, you're taking on all the ways in which I'm judgmental and a little hypercritical and sometimes a bit of an ass, right? Sometimes really hard on myself. It's such a different flavor when you're like, oh yeah, this is it. This is what I'm choosing to incarnate
Mm,
than being, at resistance to it. And I would
yeah.
really encourage folks to read I really love that, in particular that soul frame. I'll put a link to that, but that soul framework. Yeah.
It makes me curious about your character. Do you have a sense of your deep archetype or your deep character? Does anything come up?
When you say deep archetype, what do you mean? Like, I have a sense of my character, I hope, but I don't know what you mean by deep archetype.
Yeah, it's almost like there's some because I think there's some characters and archetypes that I am that are more surface level, more sort of like roles that I play a bit
Say more.
in
Yeah.
life.
Tell me more about, the surface level and your surface level and deep.
Um, Pretending to be a normal human.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very surface. I mean, I do some work. Do a job. It's for the meditation center, so it's still,
Yeah. It's
I
pretty,
can be
yeah.
pretty myself, but there's still you're like sending emails or whatever, and or yeah, like having a little chat with someone in the street, or um, maybe more so in my past, kind of. I feel like I had a lot of roles where I would, I guess, in certain relationships and connections, feel that I needed to show up in a certain way. Um, like I feel like family is a classic one of this. It's almost like you just got to uh, sort of be the person that is that allows
Really hard to
the
escape
thing.
those. Yeah. Those patterns. It's really hard to not just be yeah, for sure.
It's like your family don't want to hear about your deep spiritual revelations
Totally.
necessarily. So
No, no, they
you can
don't
just keep them
care.
to yourself, and yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. My parents don't really care how much I've meditated. I'm still, I've got my quirks and they point them out and they've got their quirks, right? Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Okay, so then would you say something like your deeper archetype is like a mystic
yeah,
or
exactly,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, okay, I feel bashful saying this, but that's 100% how I feel, is that like at the core, I'm actually a hardcore mystic shaman who's like been initiated and this, that's where I felt a lot of resonance with your journey, right? Because for me and my hardcore addiction and then the psychedelic training and the Amazon and whatnot, like I really went through some, it felt like an initiation that was just out of my control, was pulled into this path, and everything all makes sense now. The but yeah, I still have, I think unlike you, I still have a little bit of that bashfulness and like fully owning that I'm like about as far out there on the woo spectrum as you might find. Like I'm not doing daily horoscopes, but I'm pretty far out there. And so I think that if there was a deep archetype, yeah, I do resonate with mystic, and I'm actually, I think, getting more comfortable with just owning that.
Hmm. Yeah, nice. Yeah, yeah, that's super nice. And I think there's something about this way of being, where this psychedelic way of being, where that mystical connection is more allowed in everyone. I think that's something that feels important to me about this as well, is that not everyone's interested in this. Most people aren't going to go on a deep initiation like you've described. But I do think most people can feel a little bit of this, and that's nourishing for people and meaningful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that the journeying, I mean, especially for me, and this might be the sort of archetype of my specific type of mysticism, but it's like the journeying opens up to a way of being in connection that's very in line with my deep experience of the universe, which is the kind of, it's almost like energy sort of, yeah, it has this very tantric Buddhist side of it, which is just sort of like energy knowing itself and kind of non-dual, just sort of swirling, open, empty thing. And then this more sort of Jungian side, which is that what's in that energy, it might be, yeah, changeable and different, but it's also meaningful, has deep meaning and resonance. And then it's almost like yeah, being in a connection and a journey with people, it's just like the energy knowing itself and unfolding itself and revealing its meaning and sort of showing itself to itself in this very open, heartful, kind of non-dual way that is really deeply free, in the sense that people can really sink in with their own meaning structure and their own way of being.
Right, right. Because even if it's this free flowing arising and falling away of phenomena and completely non-dual, like we are here making meaning of it, and we have that capacity, right? Which is such a gift. And yeah, I love that there's a bridge between those two approaches, right? And it's not like you have to lean super, and I think that's like something that you'll see in a lot of different approaches, right? Where, you go to a psychoanalyst and it's like all about the meaning without actually ever contacting awake awareness.
Hmm.
And then you can get the, sort of Zen without really needing meaning. And there's really rich avenues in both directions, but then it's really cool. And I appreciate how you're sort of melding the two, and there's recognizing the collapse between them that was never there in the first place, the distinction. Rosa, I'm wondering if there's anything else that you want to mention or that feels important as we sort of begin to wind down here.
Yeah, there's something in what we were just describing, which is that there's something in the combination of the two, which is where the magic happens. It's kind of like relating to yourself as this alchemical vessel, really sort of like being willing to open to the meaning and the depth, but also not taking the meaning to literally, being able to be like flexible with the meaning. Um, it's like there's sort of like an underlying truth and essence, and this kind of like, yeah. If I think into when imaginal practice is at its most healthy, it's almost like there's a way in which it can be a bit too rigid and people get too stuck in the ideas, or it has to look this way, and they get too caught up in the sort of fantasy side. Or, yeah, I guess the other side is that the imaginal never gets started because there's too much sort of non-dual awareness type stuff. And somewhere in the middle, there's like this middle ground where it's like the imaginal and the meaning it's already there. It's ready to be sort of touched on, but it's sort of like pre-story level. It's just kind of like right potential of meaning that's there. And if you just listen to it, it will like tell you what's present and show you some metaphors for like what's deeply here, or help you get in touch with the most important feelings that are present. And I think that kind of finding that middle space is really important.
Okay, now I have to share. That's so cool, because I have to share something that an insight that emerged from our journey tonight, which is there have been a few moments, particularly when I was like I think about 18, 19, where after I did my first psychedelic experience, I did my first psychedelics when I was like 16, and I think this story hopefully will be a good way to wrap everything up and tie it together. And in that first time I did mushrooms, like as a kid, was like one of the greatest, probably the greatest day of my life, where I just was like, oh my God, look at how amazing and magical. And then from that moment, and this is what helped really propel me into drugs, I thought that experience was there only in psychedelics, or that was the real truth, right? That I was seeking. It was like so cool and amazing. And I kind of then went on a never ending search for it. But then there were moments when I'd be sober, and like when I was like 18 or in college, where I would feel like the hills were talking to me, and I'd be like, oh, like, this is something so psychedelic. Like I got to come here and do psychedelics. But even as we just did this journey today, I realized that it was just like that sort of immature framing that I was using, that it was like the psychedelic that I needed then, rather than just this world being psychedelic itself, and like that being already there talking to me. But I just didn't have the kind of tools to listen. And so it was just a really interesting level of meaning I actually hadn't put together until we explored just now. And so I'm grateful for that.
Nice. Yeah, cool.
Yeah. Rosa, where can people find you? I'll put a link to your website. Anything else you want people to know? Ways that they can practice with you?
No, there's stuff on my website about imaginal practice. So if all the stuff we've been talking about today sounds interesting, then go to the imaginal practice section, probably. Also the soulfulness sections like you've described. Yeah.
Well, I hope to do this again, and this was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for going on the journey with me.
Yeah, it was super fun. Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you're getting value from my work, I hope you might consider giving something back. It's how I earn my living, from the generosity of people like you who want to see more of my work in the world, and it helps contribute to the production costs of this podcast. There's a couple quick and easy ways you can do that. The first is to subscribe on Substack for just $6 a month. You'll get my literary essays and other cool updates. Secondly, you can check out my course, Life Not Wasted, which teaches you how to overcome all types of modern addictions so you can live a life so joyous that you don't need to distract or numb yourself. And lastly, you can give 5 stars on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts, or share my work with your friends. That sort of stuff makes a real difference for a dude who does what I do. In any case, there are so many places where you can spend your time today, and I'm very grateful that you're choosing to spend it here. Thank you so much.